Continuing where I left off, Chapter 5. They went to their rooms, but except for Anatole, who fell asleep the moment he got into bed, they all laid awake a long time that night. Is he really to be my husband, this stranger, this kind, handsome man? Kind, that is the chief thing, thought Princess Marya, and a terror she had almost never felt before came over her. She was afraid to look around. It seemed to her that there was someone standing in the dark corner behind the screen. And this someone was he, the devil, and was also that man with the white forehead, black eyebrows, and red lips. She rang for her maid and asked her to sleep in her room. Mademoiselle Bourienne walked up and down in the conservatory for a long time that night, vainly expecting someone, at one moment smiling, the next moment moved to tears, at the imagined words of sa pauvre mère rebuking her for her fall. The little princess kept grumbling to her maid that her bed was not properly made. She could lie neither on her face nor on her side. Every position was awkward and uncomfortable. Her burden oppressed her. It oppressed her more than ever now that Anatole had come, his presence vividly reminding her of a time when she was not in this condition, when everything was light and gay. She sat in an easy chair in her dressing jacket and nightcap. Petya, sleepy and disheveled, turned and beat the heavy feather bird for the third time, muttering to herself. I told you it was all humps and holes, the little princess repeated. I shall be glad enough to sleep. It's not my fault. And her voice trembled, like that of a child about to cry. The old prince, too, was awake. Tychon, half asleep, heard him furiously pacing and snorting. The old prince felt that he had been affronted through his daughter, and the affront was the more painful because it concerned not himself but another, his daughter, whom he loved more than himself. He told himself that he would think over the whole matter and decide what was right and what ought to be done, instead of which he only excited himself more and more. First man that turns up, forgets her father and everything else, runs up and does her hair and comes in wagging her tail, a complete stranger. Glad to abandon her father, and she knew I should noticed it. Humph! 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 As if I couldn't see that the idiot had eyes only for Bourienne. Must get rid of her. And how is it she hasn't pride enough to see it? If not for her own sake, at least for mine. She must be shown that the blockheads think nothing of her and only at Bourienne. She had no pride, but I'll show her. By telling his daughter that she was laboring under a delusion and that Anatole meant to flirt with Mademoiselle Bourienne, the old prince knew that he would wound her self-esteem, and his object, not to part with her, would be won. This thought calmed him, and he called Tychon and began to undress. The devil brought them here, he thought, as Tychon slipped the nightshirt over his fleshless old body, the chest covered with gray hair. I didn't invite them. They came here to disturb my life. What little there is left of it. Damn them, he muttered, while his head was still covered by the nightshirt. Tychon was used to the princess' habit, sometimes thinking aloud, and he faced the wrathful and inquiring countenance that emerged from the nightshirt with an impassive expression. Gone to bed? Asked the prince. Like all good valets, Tychon instinctively knew the trend of his master's thoughts. He guessed that the question referred to Prince Vasily and his son. Their honors have gone to bed and put out the lights, your excellency. There was no reason, none whatever, the prince muttered rapidly, and thrusting his feet into his slippers and his arms into his dressing gown, he went to the couch on which he slept. Although nothing had been said between Anatole and Mademoiselle Bourienne, they understood each other perfectly as far as the initial stage of their romance was concerned. Up to the appearance of the pauvre mère, they felt they had a great deal to say to each other in private, and from early morning had been seeking an opportunity to be alone together. When Princess Marya went to her father's room at the customary hour, Mademoiselle Bourienne and Anatole met in the conservatory. Princess Marya approached the door of her father's study that day with more than usual trepidation. It seemed to her that everyone not only knew that this was the day her fate would be decided, but knew what she was thinking about it. She read this in Tykhon's face, and in the face of Prince Vasili's valet, who bowed low to her when he passed her in the corridor carrying hot water. The old prince was very affectionate and circumspect in his treatment of his daughter that morning. Princess Marya knew this strained expression of her father's very well. It was an expression that always came over his face when, vexed at her failure to understand an arithmetical problem, he would clench his bony fist and get up and walk away from her, repeating the same words over and over again in a low voice. He came to the point at once, addressing her with polite formality. "A proposal has been made to me concerning you," he said with an unnatural smile. "I dare say you have surmised that Prince Vasily has not come here bringing his protege. For some reason, Prince Nikolai Androvitch referred to Anatole as a protege for the sake of my charms. Yesterday, they made a proposal concerning you, and you know my principles. I refer the matter to you." "How am I to understand you, mon père?" murmured the princess, blushing, then turning pale. "How are you to understand me?" cried her father irately. "Prince Vasily finds you acceptable as a daughter-in-law and makes a proposal on behalf of his protege. That's how you are to understand me. How are you to understand, I ask you?" "I do not know, mon père, how you regard this," said the princess in a whisper. What have I to do with it? Leave me out of it. I am not getting married. What about you? That is what it should be desirable to know." The princess saw that her father was ill-disposed toward the matter, but at the same time it occurred to her that her father fate would be decided now or never. She lowered her eyes to avoid the gaze under which she felt she would be incapable of thinking, and only able to submit from habit. "I have but one desire, to carry out your wishes," she said. "But if I had to express my own wishes—" The prince cut her off before she could finish. "Splendid!" he shouted. "He will take you with your dowry and grab Mademoiselle Bourienne into the bargain. She'll be the wife, while you—" The prince stopped. He saw the effect his words had produced on his daughter. She lowered her head, on the verge of weeping. Come, I was only joking, he said. "Remember one thing, princess. I hold to the principle that a young woman has the right to choose. I give you complete freedom. But remember, your life's happiness depends on your decision. No need to talk about me." "But I don't know, mon père. There's nothing to say. He received his orders, and he married you or anybody. But you are free to choose. Go to your room and think it over, and come back in an hour and tell me in his presence, yes or no. I know you will pray over it. Well, pray if you like. Only you'd do better to think. Go along. Yes or no. Yes or no. Yes or no." He was still shouting when the princess, as if in a fog, walked unsteadily out of the study. Her fate was decided, and happily decided. But what her father had said about Mademoiselle Bourienne, that was a dreadful insinuation. It was not true, of course, but still it was dreadful, and she could not help thinking about it. She walked straight on through the conservatory, neither seeing nor hearing anything, when all at once she was roused by the familiar sound of Mademoiselle Bourienne's voice speaking in a whisper. She raised her eyes, and a few steps away saw Anatole embracing the Frenchwoman and whispering in her ear with a horrid expression on his handsome face. Anatole looked at Princess Marya without once releasing Mademoiselle Bourienne, who had not seen her from his embrace. "Who's there? What is it? Wait," Anatole seemed to say. Prince Marya looked at them in silence. She could not grasp it. Finally, Mademoiselle Bourienne uttered a shriek and ran out. Anatole, with an amused smile, bowed to the Princess Marya. as if inviting her to laugh at this novel incident, and then, with a shrug of his shoulders, went to the door leading to his rooms. An hour later, Tikhon came to summon Princess Marya to the old prince, informing her that Prince Vasily Sergeyevich was also there. When he came into the room, Princess Marya was sitting on the sofa, holding the weeping Mademoiselle Bourienne in her arms, and gently stroking her head. The princess's beautiful eyes had regained their former radiant serenity, and were looking with tender love and compassion at Mademoiselle Bourienne's pretty little face. "No, princess, I have lost your regard forever," said Mademoiselle Bourienne. "Why? I love you more than ever," replied Princess Marya, "and I will try to do all I can for your happiness. But you must despise me. You, who are so pure, can never understand being carried away by passion. Ah, only ma pauvre Maria." "I understand everything," said Princess Marya with a sad smile. "Calm yourself, my dear. I'm going to my father now," she said, and went out. Prince Vasily was sitting with one leg crossed high over the other, a snuff-box in his hand, and a smile of deep emotion on his face. As if having been moved to the utmost, he was forced to deplore and laugh at his own sensibility. When the princess came in, he hastily took a pinch of snuff. "Ah, my dear," he said, rising and taking both her hands. He sighed and went on. "My son's fate is in your hands. Give us your decision, my dear, sweet, gentle Maria, whom I've always looked like a daughter, who I've loved like a daughter." He drew back. A real tear appeared in his eye. "Humph, humph," snorted Prince Nikolai Androvitch. "The prince, on behalf of his protege, his son, has made you a proposal. Do you or do you not wish to be the wife of Prince Anatole Korygin? Reply yes or no," he shouted. "And then I reserve the right to state my own opinion. Yes, my opinion, and only my opinion," he added, turning to Prince Vasily in response to his imploring look. "Yes or no?" "Well?" "My wish, mon Pierre, is never to leave you, never to separate my life from yours. I do not desire to marry," she said with conviction, her beautiful eyes turning from her father to Prince Vasily. "Nonsense! Foolishness! Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense!" cried the old prince, frowning and taking his daughter's hand. He did not kiss her, but bent his forehead to hers, just touching it, then squeezed the hand. He held it so that she winced and uttered a cry. Prince Vasily rose. "My dear, I must tell you that this is a moment I shall never forget. Never! But, my dear, will you not give us a little hope of moving so kind, so generous a heart? Just say, perhaps, the future is so vast. Say, perhaps, Prince, what I have said is all there is in my heart. I thank you for the honor, but I shall never be your son's wife." "Well, so it's all over, finished, my dear fellow. Glad to have seen you, very glad to have seen you. Go back to your room. Princess, go," said the old prince. "Very glad to have seen you," he repeated, embracing Prince Vasily. "My vocation is of a different one," thought Princess Marya. "My vocation is to be happy in another way, to find happiness in love and self-sacrifice. And, cost what it may, I will make poor Amélie happy. She loves him so passionately, and so passionately repents. I will do all I can to arrange a match between them. If he is not rich, I will give her the means. I will ask her, my father. I'll ask André. I shall be so happy when she is his wife. She is so unfortunate, a stranger here, alone and helpless. And, my God, how passionately she must love him to so far forget herself. Perhaps I might have done the same," thought Princess Marya. Chapter 6. The Rostovs have had no news of Nikolai for a long time. Not till midwinter was the Count at last handed a letter addressed in his son's handwriting. On receiving it, he tiptoed to his study in alarmed and haste, trying to escape notice, and shut himself in to read the letter. When Annamikhailova learned of the letter, she always knew everything that went on in the house. She quietly slipped into the Count's room and found him with the letter in his hand. sobbing and laughing at the same time. Though her circumstances had improved, Annamikhailova continued to live at the Rostovs. "My dear friend," she said in a tone of mournful inquiry, prepared to offer whatever sympathy might be required. The Count sobbed still more. "Nikolosha, a letter, wounded, might have been, ma chère, wounded, my darling boy, the little Countess, promoted to an officer. Thank God. How are we to tell the little Countess?" Annamikhailova sat down beside him, and with her own handkerchief dried her tears, those that had fallen on the letter and her own, and after reading the letter and comforting the Count, she decided that at dinner and till tea time she would prepare the Countess, and after tea, with God's help, would tell her. All during dinner, Annamikhailova talked of rumors concerning the war and Nikoloshna. Twice she asked when his last letter had been received, though she already knew, and remarked that quite possibly they might get a letter from him that very day. Each time that these hints disquieted the Countess, and she commenced glancing from the Count to Annamikhailova, the latter very adroitly directed the conversation to trivial matters. Natasha, who of all the family was most gifted with the faculty of catching the subtleties of intonation, a glance, or the expression of a face, pricked up her ears at the beginning of dinner, and felt that there was some secret between her father and Annamikhailova, that had something to do with her brother, and that Annamikhailova was preparing them for it. Despite all her daring, Natasha knew how sensitive her mother was to anything relating to Nikoloshka. She did not venture to ask any questions during dinner, but she was too excited to eat, and ignoring the reprimands of her governess, kept wriggling about on her chair. After dinner, she rushed headlong to Annamikhailova, overtook her in the sitting room, and flung herself on her neck. "Auntie, darling, tell me, what is it?" "Nothing, my dear." "No, dearest darling, sweet little peach. I won't let you go. I'm certain you know something." Annamikhailova shook her head. "You're a little sly boots, mon enfant. A letter from Nikolenka?" "I'm sure it is," Natasha shrilled, reading confirmation on Annamikhailova's face. "But for heaven's sake, be careful. You know what a shock it may be to your mother." I will. Only tell me, won't you?" "If you don't, I'll go and tell at once." Annamikhailova briefly recounted the contents of the letter, on condition that you tell no one. "Truly on my word of honor," said Natasha, crossing herself, "I won't tell a soul," and she ran off to find Sonya. "Nikolenka, wounded, a letter," she announced in gleeful triumph. "Nicholas!" was all Sonya could say, instantly turning white. Natasha, seeing the impression the news of her brother's wound made on Sonya, for the first time felt the distressing aspect of the news. She rushed to Sonya, threw her arms around her, and burst into tears. "He's only slightly wounded, and he has been made an officer. He's well now. He wore the letter himself," she said through her tears. "It's plain to be seen that all you women are cry-babies," said Petya, pacing the room with a long, resolute strides. "I am very glad, really very glad that my brother has distinguished himself so. You are all blubberers. You don't understand." Natasha smiled through her tears. "You haven't read the letter?" asked Sonya. "No, but she said it was all over, and there's an officer now." "Thank God," said Sonya, crossing herself. "But perhaps she wasn't telling you the truth. Let's go to Mama." Petya paced the room in silence, and then said, "If I were in Nikolola's place, I'd have killed a lot more of those Frenchmen. They're all such villains. I have to kill so many that there would have been a whole heap of them," Petya went on. "Be quiet, Petya. What a little silly you are." "I'm not the one who's silly. The ones who are silly are those who cry over nothing," said Petya. "Can you remember him?" Natasha suddenly asked, after a momentary silence. Sonya smiled. "Remember Nicholas?" "No, Sonya, but do you remember so that you remember him perfectly, so that you remember everything?" Natasha asked with an emphatic gesture, apparently trying to give her words the most serious meaning. "I can remember Nikolenka, too," she said, "but I can't remember Boris. I can't remember him at all." "What? You don't remember Boris?" asked Sonya in surprise. "It's not that I don't remember. I know what he looks like, but I don't remember him as I do Nikolenka." I can shut my eyes and see him. But Boris? No. She shut her eyes. No, nothing at all. Oh, Natasha, said Sonya, gravely and rapturously, as if she considered her unworthy of hearing what she was about to say, and was speaking to someone else with whom jesting was out of the question. Once I had fallen in love with your brother. No matter what might happen to him or to me, I could never cease loving him as long as I live. Natasha gazed at Sonya with inquisitive, wondering eyes and said nothing. She felt that what Sonya had said was the truth, that there was such love, but she herself had never experienced anything like it. She believed in it without understanding it. Shall you write to him? She asked. Sonya grew thoughtful. The question of how to write to Nicholas and whether she ought to write tormented her. Now that he was an officer and a wounded hero, would it be right to remind him of herself, and as it might seem, of the obligation he had assumed in regard to her? I don't know. I think if he writes, I'll write, she said, blushing. And you won't be ashamed to write him? Sonya smiled. No. Well, I'll feel ashamed to write Boris, and I'm not going to. But why ashamed? Oh, I don't know. It's awkward. I feel ashamed. I know what she be ashamed, said Petya, who had been offended by Natasha's previous remark. It's because she fell in love with that fat fellow with the spectacles. This was Petya's description of his namesake, the new Count Besakov. And now she's in love with that singer. He meant Natasha's Italian singing teacher. That's why she's ashamed. Petya, you are so stupid, said Natasha. No stupider than you are, madam, said 9-year-old Petya with the air of an old brigadier. The countess had been prepared by Annamikhailova's hints at a dinner. On retiring to her own room, she sat in an easy chair, her eyes fixed on a miniature portrait of her son on the lid of a snuff-box, and the tears welled up in her eyes. Annamikhailova, the letter in her hand, approached the countess's room on tiptoe and paused outside the door. Don't come in, she said to the old count. Later, and she went in, shutting the door after her. The count put his ear to the keyhole and listened. At first he heard the sound of casual talk. Then Annaamikhailova's voice delivering a long speech, then a cry, then silence, then both voices talking at once in joyful intonations, and finally footsteps. And Annamikhailova opened the door. Her face wore the proud expression of a surgeon who had performed a difficult amputation, and amidst the public to admire his skill. It's done, she said to the count, triumphantly pointing to the countess, who sat holding the snuff-box with the portrait on it, and in one hand, and the letter in the other, pressing them alternately to her lips. When she saw the count, she held out her arms to him, and embraced his bald head, looking over the top of it at the portrait and the letter. Then, in order to press them to her lips once more, she gently pushed the bald head away. Vera, Natasha, Sonya, Petya came into the room, and the reading of the letter began. After a brief description of the campaign, the 2 battles in which he had taken part, and his promotion, Nikolai wrote that he had kissed his father and mother's hand, and asked for their blessing, and kissed Vera, Natasha, and Petya. He sent greetings to Major Schelling, Madame Schoss, and his old nurse, and finally asked them to kiss for him dear Sonya, whom he still loved and thought of just the same as ever. When she heard this, Sonya blushed so that her tears came to her eyes, and unable to endure the looks turned upon her, ran into the ballroom, where she whirled and spun about with her skirts ballooning out, till flushed and smiling she plumped down on the floor. The countess was weeping. Why are you crying, Mamma? asked Vera. From all he writes, one ought to rejoice, not cry. That was perfectly true, but the count and countess and Natasha all looked at her reproachfully. Whom does she take after? The countess wondered. Nicholas's letter was read over 100 times. Those who were considered worthy of hearing it had to come to the countess, who would not let it out of her hands. The tutors, nurses, and Mitenka came, as well as several friends, and each time the countess reread the letter with fresh delight, each time discovering new virtues in her Nicolasha. How strange, how extraordinary and joyous it seemed to her that her son, whose tiny limbs had faintly stirred within her 20 years ago, that son about whom she had to use to quarrel with the too indulgent count, that son who had learned to say père before he could say nanny, the same son should now be in a foreign land amid strange surroundings, a valiant warrior, alone, without help or guidance, and doing there a man's work. The universal experience of the ages, showing that children imperceptibly grow from the cradle to manhood, did not exist for the Countess. The growth of her son had been for her at every stage as extraordinary as though millions and millions of men had not already developed the same way. Just as 20 years before it seemed unbelievable that the little creature lying under her heart would never cry, nurse at the breast, or talk, so now she could not believe that the same little creature could be that strong, brave officer, that paragon of sons and men, which, judging by his terror, he now was. What style! How charmingly he describes everything, she said, reading over the descriptive passage of the letter. And what a soul! Nothing about himself. Not a word. A great deal about someone called Desanov, though he himself was probably braver than anyone. I always said, when he was only so high, I would always say. Far more than a week they were busy preparing rough drafts and making fair copies of letters to Nikolosha from all the household. Under the Countess's supervision and the Count's solitude, money and all things necessary for the uniform and equipment of the newly commissioned officer were got together. Annamikhailova, a practical woman, had succeeded in obtaining special favors within the military authorities for herself and her son that even extended to their correspondence. She had opportunities of sending her letters to the Grand Duke Konstantin Pavlovich, who commanded the guards. The Rostovs assumed that the Russian guards abroad were sufficiently definite address, and that if a letter reached the Grand Duke in command of the guards there, no reason why it should not reach the Pavlograd regiment, which was presumably somewhere in the same vicinity. Consequently, it was decided to send the letters and money by the Grand Duke's courier to Boris, and Boris would see that they got to Nikoloshka. There were letters from the Count and Countess, Petya, Vera, Natasha, and Sonya, and 6,000 rubles for his outfits, and various other things, which the Count sent to his son. And I'm going to leave it off there. Thank you for watching, and continue to watch. If you like it, subscribe. Down there, the button below. Also give it a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or leave a comment, leave your opinion. I totally am for it. And you don't have to do anything, just keep watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.